Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Creeps on Spring Break, submitted by Hockney. Once upon a time, when I was in college, a group of my friends decided to go to Florida for spring break. About 10 of us went, and we were all staying at a shitty hotel. The only saving grace at the place was the pool. But we didn't care. Most of the time we were at the beach or getting hammered. One night while out at a bar, a bunch of the girls we were with were getting hit on by some local guys who said they were from Wynwood. We were in Miami at the time. I've since looked up this place online, but back then I had no idea about the good or bad parts of Miami. Turns out it's not such a great neighborhood, and that proved right on this trip. Everyone was having a great time, and even if you've never been down there, you have to know the shit gets out of hand nearly day and night on spring break. I'd hate to be a cop down there dealing with all the craziness, but at the time, I was part of all that craziness. So I guess we were just part of the problems people deal with. We didn't really get out of control, but partying is partying. So anyway, these guys invited us to a party they were having the next night, way out at Crandon Beach Park. It was going to be their friend's party, and they convinced us that we were really cool, and honestly, we were up for anything that involved not paying top dollar for beer and booze. The two main guys we were talking to, I'll call Michael and Jim. They said we could just chip in for drinks and food when we got there. The majority of our group was smart and brought the exact amount of money and left the rest in their hotel rooms. But my one friend, I'll call him Buzz, did not. He practically brought his whole stash of money for the week. Why? To this day, I still don't know why. So we got down there in some cabs and met up with Michael and Jim and their friends and hung out on the beach all day just having a good time. I couldn't help but notice that Buzz had more than one time flashed the wad of cash that he had with him. But I really didn't think too much of it at the time. I just noticed him doing it. Michael and Jim had also brought some ladies along, and there were about 25 of us total. My girlfriend didn't come on the trip, and I was really into her, and I promised her that I wouldn't fool around, and I didn't, despite one of the local girls coming on to me all that day. As it was getting later on, a few of the people ran for some more food and such, and Michael and Jim said we should go up the beach into the park area to have a fire and keep the party going into the night. We had no idea if that was legal to do, but we did it anyway. Good old beer-fueled thinking. We got a bonfire rolling, and as the night went on, the local folks started taking off. And take off they did, along with stuff that our group had brought. My friend Missy was the first to notice that her small bag with her ID and some cash went missing, but that happened much later in the night when we were talking about heading back to the hotel. After a while, I started to notice that Michael and Jim weren't around. They disappeared for a bit, but then suddenly popped back up into the dying firelight, saying that they had to take off too, and they had work in the morning. The rest of us started gathering up our things and talking about how we were going to get back to the hotel, and it looked like at that point we were going to have to hoof it. And that's when I noticed Buzz wasn't around. So did the other guys. We thought maybe he'd taken off with one of the local girls, so we started walking up and down the beach to see if we could find them. No luck. After an hour passed, we were starting to sober up and figured out that something was wrong. This was in 1993, so no cell phones or things like that were at our disposal. My friend Derek and I started walking farther up the beach looking for Buzz and calling out his name, but all we heard were the waves rolling in. We had gone around a bend in the beach and could no longer see the fire that was going out way in the distance. We were just yelling for Buzz. There was a bit of a moon out, but it was still hard to see. And then Derek kicked something with his foot and tripped. We heard a low, "Fuck, what? What the fuck?" And we looked down. It was Buzz, buried in the sand up to his neck with just his head sticking out, obviously. and the waves coming in were maybe a foot from him. We both yelled out, and I said, "Holy shit, Buzz, are you all right?" We started digging around his head, hoping he was lying on his back or something. But no, he was in the sand pretty deep. We kept asking him questions, but he was really out of it and just kept saying, "Guys, help, man, I can't breathe." Derek and I kept digging, swearing the whole time, and asking questions Buzz couldn't answer until we got a huge portion of sand away from him. We found he was actually on his knees, and after about 20 more minutes we were able to pull him out by his arms. We all just lay there for a little while catching our breath, and finally Buzz was getting it together and coming around. We got him to his feet and half-dragged him back to our friends as he tried to tell us what he remembered. He said that he and Michael had gone off with 2 of the local girls up the beach to presumably fool around. But when they had gotten around the bend that we had gotten around, Buzz said he felt something smash on the back of his head, and he just fell down on the sand. He doesn't remember much after that. He was totally out of it until we came along. His wallet and all his money were gone, and obviously Michael and the 2 girls had disappeared. It didn't take a genius to see that he'd been jumped and robbed and then buried up to his neck. I have no idea if those assholes were trying to drown him, but those waves were getting awfully close to his head when we got there. And even now I get freaked out thinking what could have happened to him. And I thought shit like that only happened in the movies, but it could have really happened that night. As a group, we walked back to the road to the mainland, and there were 0 cars coming by, until some really cool surfer guys in a pickup stopped. We said we needed to get our buddy to a hospital, and Derek and I jumped in the bed with Buzz, and they said they'd help. They also said they'd be back with some other friends to get the rest of our party. The guys took us right to a hospital, and we got Buzz looked at. He had a big gash in the back of his head that I hadn't noticed, and it needed stitches. They had him stay there the rest of the night. Not true to their word, the cool surf guys came back with our friends about an hour later. The police showed up and we told them everything that had happened, and Missy and Jen also told them about stuff that they had that was missing. When we said where the people were from, this Wynwood area, one of the cops said, "Oh man, I wish you guys would have known better." They informed us that it's a really shitty part of the city. They took our statement and said Buzz was lucky, and they'd have to see what they could do, but were honest that we were looking for a needle in a haystack as far as getting this stuff back and finding the guys that had taken it and done what they had done. We stayed down there for 3 more days, but the partying was more low-key, and we basically stayed at our hotel or were right in the neighborhood the entire time. So, yeah, that was the time my friend was almost murdered by some real pieces of shit while we were on spring break. I still talk to my buddies from time to time, and we always bring up how if we had been just a little later, Buzz might have drowned. Needless to say, after that, none of us went on spring break again. Study Abroad Impersonator by Sudden Bubble. This was about 15 years ago. I was 19 and studying abroad in a country in Southeast Asia. The study abroad program was very small. Think like 6 or 7 students, and loosely structured, and we had a ton of freedom. I'd been traveling the summer before the program started and arrived a week earlier than the other students. They had us staying in a small house near the program's center in a busy neighborhood. The house was also rented to locals during the summer, but typically only to students from this program during the school year. I had moved into the house early, and it was empty aside from myself. The owners of the house were pretty traditional and strict, and it was made clear that we were not allowed to have any visitors, especially men. At one point during my first day there, I heard knocking at the door. I looked out from an upstairs window, and it was a bald local guy that didn't look like anyone from my school program. He knocked for about 10 minutes, but I decided to pretend I wasn't there, and he eventually left. The day this happened was also during Ramadan. There's typically a curfew in this city, but because of Ramadan, many people were out late eating. I met up with a local couch surfing group and ended up hitting it off with a cute German tourist. Eventually, we made a plan for him to sneak into my house with me, which we thought would be easy because it was so late. When we arrived, I saw a couple of cars outside of the house, so I had him wait at the far end of the block so I could make sure the coast was clear. What I walked up to was extremely confusing. There was a big white Jeep in front of the house, and men with large guns were standing around it. There was also a small gray sedan with the doors open and a man sitting in the driver's seat. He looked just like the man that had been knocking at the door earlier. The housekeeper, a sweet middle-aged man, was also outside with the men and seemed very upset. I can't remember exactly what was said, but I remember the man in the car repeatedly saying my full name, which I do not go by. I'm changing it here for privacy. He said something like, "Come on, Cassandra, everything is okay, just get in the car." I only go by Cassie, and never introduced myself as Cassandra. I had no idea who this person was, but he did feel extremely friendly and weirdly charming. Like he was there to help me, but I knew he wasn't. The men with the guns then started asking me if I knew him. I said no repeatedly, but I got the weird feeling that all they wanted me to say was yes, like it would be solving some sort of problem for them. They weren't pointing their guns at me, but it was still extremely frightening, especially because I felt like I had nowhere to go, and also that I was already hiding my German visitor. The man in the sedan got out and approached me and tried to kind of herd me into the car. At this point, the men with the guns had grabbed the housekeeper and were being really rough with him. Some neighbors were watching nearby, and I was confused why no one was helping. Finally, a neighbor approached and yelled something in the local language to the group. He told me in English to go inside immediately. Everyone left, and the men with the guns took the housekeeper with them. I got inside and locked the door, and at that point I started crying, but I still felt a little bit in shock. Everything felt quiet very suddenly, in comparison to all the commotion. A few minutes later, I heard a light knocking at the door, and someone calling, "Cassie." I realized it was the German tourist. I ended up leaving with him and going back to his hotel instead, and he turned out to be a great guy and really helped me calm down. When I got back to the house the next day, everything seemed to be mostly normal. The housekeeper was there, and though we didn't speak the same language, he seemed very despondent. What I learned later was that the white Jeep was an unmarked police car, and the men with guns were local police. The man in the sedan had been trying to get in the house, and someone had called the cops on him. I still have no idea what the man in the sedan wanted or how he knew my full name, but somehow the housekeeper ended up getting blamed for the confusion and was apparently beaten at the police station before the same neighbor that helped me got a group from the neighborhood together to go get him. By far the most troubling part was when I called my advisor from the school that day to let her know what had happened. She was a really nice person, but as soon as we got on the phone, she had a really strict tone with me and said something along the lines of, "Cassie, we already told you that you may absolutely not have male visitors. Even if you ask permission, it's not okay." I was confused, but apparently a female had called and left a message on her phone the day before saying that a man would be coming to the house later and that the housekeeper should let him in. The female had called herself Cassandra. That part still gives me a stomachache when I think about it. My advisor believed me when I told her that that wasn't me, but there didn't seem to be much recourse aside from asking the neighborhood to look out for the man in the sedan and to not let him in the house. I'm still not sure how this happened or what would have happened had the man gotten into the house or had I gotten into his car. My best guess is that a student that used to live in that house saw from our school's private Facebook group that I would be arriving early, and for some reason gave the information to the man and called my advisor posing as me. Facebook is one of the few places where I have my account under Cassandra instead of Cassie, and I don't know how else they would know how to contact my advisor. Either way, I still have no idea what they would have done with me, and I'm extremely grateful to have not been alone with that man. Creature Encounter in the Woods, submitted by Adrian B. This event took place at Morgan Monroe Forest at the very back spot of Oak Ridge Campgrounds in Martinsville, Indiana. It was June of 2015, the day before Father's Day to be exact. Me, my girlfriend at the time, her mom and her mom's friend Jeff all went down to camp for the weekend. We were having the time of our lives all day hiking, throwing back Coors Light and bottles of wine. The people I was there with were very crunchy, peaceful folks. I, however, am not as crunchy and very fact-based. I don't believe in aliens, ghosts, Reiki healing, etc. So when nighttime fell and we started hanging up glow sticks, we were just listening to Fleetwood Mac, playing guitar, some sound bowls, etc. For some reason, we were the only ones in the entire campground. This was so strange, honestly, because that place was normally packed and everyone always kind of fought over the very back campsite that we had. We were having a blast, and all of a sudden a car showed up. Not only a car, but a van, and they parked at the campsite next to ours. They shut their lights off, got out, and just sat in the pitch black. It was maybe around 10:30 or 11 at night. As I'm sure you can guess, this freaked us all out a bit, especially the women. So I told Jeff, the other guy in our group, that I was going to go up and investigate and see what the hell these mystery campers were doing. I went over to them and saw a man and a woman somewhere in their 40s, and I made up a lie and said, "Hey, do you guys hear that over there? We thought we heard something." They immediately shot up out of their chairs and said, "Where?" To which I pointed west, and they said, "That's what we thought." I got talking to these people, and they told me that they were Bigfoot hunters, part of the BFRO, to be more exact. Frankly, inside myself, I was holding back so much laughter, but to be honest, they were actually very sweet and seemed genuine. They ended up talking to us all, showing us their high-tech gear, and the man even told me a story about encountering a Bigfoot while he was driving one time. I could see a little crack in his eyes like it was almost driving him nuts. But anyway, these people ended up leaving shortly after, around 12 or 12:30. We all felt much better about the situation and went forward blasting music, doing sound bowls, and trying to get on a higher vibration. Around 2:30 or 3 a.m., we were all in our tent together. My girlfriend's mom was operating a sound bowl, and my girlfriend at the time was laying on me. Jeff was doing this hand rub together energy thing, and I was at so much peace I was almost asleep. And then it happened. And listen to me, man, I promise you, none of what I'm about to say is a lie. I have always been the most fact-based, no-bullshit person anyone has ever met. I grew up atheist and only believed in science-based actualities. Out of nowhere, on one of the most peaceful and still nights I had ever experienced, out of the woods came a blood-curdling sound or scream, and we were completely surrounded by it. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, but the best way I can describe it is a low samurai growl mixed with a high-pitched, oscillating, almost tentacle-like scream. It's so hard to describe. I can kind of vocalize it, even though it sounds ridiculous. It was coming from all angles. The tent was literally vibrating. None of us could move. We were stricken with fear. And on top of this, a thunderstorm came out of nowhere, and it was now pouring rain. Literally came out of nowhere, man. My partner at the time looked at me and shrieked, "What do we do?" To which I said, "I don't fucking know." Her mom was rocking back and forth saying, "No, no, 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 we're gonna die." And then Jeff said, "Where are the keys? We have to get to the Subaru." He found the keys, opened the tent, and we all sprinted to the Subaru, got in, and all clenched together in fear. The sounds didn't stop. Much like the tent, the car was vibrating from the noise. We opened the sunroof during the storm and tried to see what we could, but it was so chaotic we couldn't focus at all. This went on for some time. The next thing I remember was waking up clenching my girlfriend. We had all somehow passed out like that. I woke up my girlfriend, and we honestly both laughed. Like, what in the hell happened? We all talked for hours about it, putting the pieces together, and we all agreed we had to come back. So we did go back. Every weekend for the rest of the summer, and even bumped into the Bigfoot people again, and told them what happened, to which they got very excited and asked us what the date was, because they had recorders out in the woods. Believe it or not, they had no data from the night of the occurrence. I investigated all of this like a madman and started to literally feel a little nuts, and I had to stop myself from developing the madness I had originally seen in the face of the BFRO guy that I had met directly before all of this happened. I stopped investigating and got back to my life. But I did find some sounds online that sounded similar to what we had heard, and also found out that on the BFRO website that Morgan Monroe Forest has the most reported Sasquatch encounters in the whole state of Indiana. Raised by a Murderer by Scary Salad Medley. My mom was a single mother of 3 in the early 2000s and eventually started going on dates when I was about 6. I remember the first time I met him. He made me feel uncomfortable, but my mom shrugged it off because I was a shy kid. She had done her due diligence and Googled his name, coming across a court case, him versus state. It listed him as a convicted felon of murder from back in the early 80s. I don't know how, but he convinced her that it was a mistake. I guess because he had a very generic name, she believed him. We were raised by him, called him Dad, even at one point asking him to adopt us. The adoption never happened, thank God. He was a good dad to us, at first. But things started to get weird when I turned 12. Suddenly, I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers, wasn't allowed to choose my own haircuts, and wasn't allowed to watch TV. It escalated to padlocks on the fridge and pantry, having to ask permission to drink water, and never being allowed in the kitchen past 8 p.m. He was a master manipulator, so at the time we all thought it sucked, but was normal punishment, despite us not having done anything to deserve it. I lost my door for weeks on end for stupid stuff like forgetting to do the dishes after dinner. Once, when I was 16, I wanted to not go to my brother's soccer game so I could study, and he went into a blinding rage. I think that was the first time I was ever truly afraid of him. He was a large man, probably 4 times my weight at the time. I think that was the first time his mask fully slipped in front of me. He started being weird and creepy towards me once I turned 18. One night as I was sleeping, he came into my room and laid on my bed, saying he loved me. I was so tired I didn't even have time to think of how creepy it was until much later. I pushed him out of my room and went back to bed. The next day, while me and my family were gone, he stayed behind. He trashed my sister's room for no reason. She was only 11 at the time and was very upset. He gave her the middle finger, and my mom finally lost it and told him to pack up his stuff. He brandished a gun and waved it in my face before taking off in his car. We called the cops, and after nearly getting shot, he was arrested. We found out he was a murderer when his bond was set at $250,000. He tried to lie to my mom again, but it didn't work this time. I looked up the case, and it was way worse than just a murder. He had beaten someone to death with a metal pipe late at night in a highly populated park. I did not know this man. Not truly. Neither had my mom. Not really. He got out on bond, and no idea who paid for that. He tried to come back to the house, and I was the only one home. I had no idea my siblings had not locked the door when they had left for the day. I was cooking pasta before heading to work when I heard the front door open. I peered my head to the front door and my blood ran cold as I saw him standing there. He said something to me, but I don't remember what it was. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door, not even bothering to turn off the stove. I pressed up against the bathroom door and called my mom as he banged on the door, asking me why I didn't love him. I was so afraid, I nearly sent myself into an asthma attack. My mom had a family friend come by and pick me up. When they entered the house, he wasn't there anymore. That was the last time I saw him, back in 2017. He'd helped raise me and my siblings for 13 years. It was the closest thing I ever had to a normal dad, which, given everything, is kind of sad when I think about it too much. I can't help but worry that I'll fall back into the same toxic and manipulative relationship. It's what I knew growing up, after all. Maybe that's why I keep people at a distance now. The reason I thought about this recently is because some true crime TikToker actually covered the story of the man he murdered all those years ago, and I stumbled across it. One of his daughters even commented on the post, giving more details about what it was like growing up with him. It was odd, thinking that so many of my peers could have put two and two together if they had seen the TikTok. I know I'm a victim in all of this, but I couldn't help but feel ashamed that I was connected to this man and his atrocities. I could end this with the typical, so let's never meet again. But I know we won't, because he died. I didn't go to the funeral. Almost nobody did. From what my mom told me, not even his parents went. The last thing I want to say is please don't give my mom any hate. She was manipulated into believing he was a good man. We've made peace with her on this particular subject. A lot of the things I mentioned happening in my childhood were things she didn't know about until he was already dead. Lastly, if you think you know who I am based on this story, please, keep it to yourself. Highway Hunting Grounds by VorUKR. This happened to me in the fall of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. My friend, I'll call him Jay, and I were on our way from New York City to Michigan to do a couple of vinyl flooring jobs, and also scout some potential properties to renovate and flip. We were using his work truck, which was a Ford F-150. We decided to leave in the evening and make the drive all night to get to our destination. We were on I-80, which is a 2-lane highway that passes through the mountains of Pennsylvania. This highway is far from safe. It's elevated in mountainous terrain, and there are constant turns. It snakes around a lot. So, if you go through a guardrail, you're flying down into the darkness of a ditch. Anyway, I was driving while Jay was trying to get some sleep, and I stopped at a service plaza to refuel and run into the shop real quick to get some drinks and snacks for the road. It was a little past midnight, and I noticed one other car refueling a few pumps from us. It was a red or burgundy SUV, a Mazda or a Suzuki. And I paid for it, and the driver didn't mind as I ran back to the truck. Fast forward 30 minutes later, and I was cruising on the left lane doing 90. That's when I noticed the headlights behind us. It was the same red SUV from the service plaza. At first I didn't think anything of it, but it dawned on me that guy had been following me since the service plaza. I decided to do a quick test to see if I was being tailed or not, and since I was doing 90 consistently, I slowed down to 70 and waited to see if he'd pass me. The guy also slowed down, so now I was on alert. I woke up Jay and told him the situation. "Bro, I think this guy is following us." My friend Jay is an ex-Army Ranger who is a lot more vigilant than me, and also crazier. Immediately he said, "That's the car from the gas station. I noticed the guy was looking at you extra hard when you passed by him." "Okay, switch lanes, see what he does." So I switched lanes, and the SUV did so as well. "Okay," said Jay. Slow down to a stop and pull over on the shoulder and see what he does." I listened and slowed down to a complete stop on the shoulder of the highway. And this fucking psycho slowed down and parked behind us. "Wow, this guy's got a lot of balls. He definitely has a gun on him," Jay exclaimed. Then he said, "Okay, pull out and gun it to 90. I have an idea." I took stock with what we had in the truck that could be used as weapons. We had a hatchet and a machete, and each of us had a folding knife on us, but no firearms. I pulled off the shoulder and stayed in the right lane as I pressed down hard on the gas. Then Jay wanted me to brake check the guy so he could crash into the back of us, and we could charge the car with a machete and a hatchet and hope for the best. But at that point, the guy wasn't an active threat. If he tried to ram the truck or shoot at us, then that would be a different story. So right then I decided against the brake check. Jay looked around the inside of the truck and grabbed a high-powered handheld spotlight and opened the back window of the truck. "Okay, I'm going to light his ass up and see if we can get a good look at him." So he turned on the spotlight, and guess what? The guy's front windows were heavily tinted, so we couldn't get a look at his face. I said, "Yo, Jay, I'm going to switch lanes. Try to aim at the side. Maybe his side windows aren't tinted." So I quickly swerved to the left lane, and as I did, Jay turned on the spotlight again. I made sure to turn my head toward the SUV at the same time. For the 3 seconds we had him illuminated, I will never forget the look of this guy. He was tall, at least over 6'3", because he was hunched over the steering wheel. He had the face of Uncle Fester from the Addams Family and the hair of Kramer from Seinfeld, along with 5 o'clock Shadow. Once he saw that I wasn't alone and that we knew what he looked like, he turned at a truck rest stop area. To this day, me and Jay get into debates about whether we should have brake-checked the guy or not. He was under the impression the guy was a serial killer, that he ended up finding another victim instead of being killed by us, and possibly a trucker sleeping in his cab. I've analyzed this situation and concluded that the guy's intentions were definitely evil. I mean, how evil? Robbery at the minimum. Kidnapping, murder at the worst. But thank God I was never able to find out. Alone at the Campsite by Barabbas 1840. In the summer of 2022, I was desperate and frustrated. I had quit my job a few months prior in the pursuit of my own startup, and my business wasn't exactly thriving. After 6 years of IVF treatment, my wife had blessed me with a daughter earlier that year, and while I was elated to be a father, the stress of being a dad, the financial pressures from the clinic, and the weight of being the sole provider for my family had taken a significant toll in recent months. As summer approached, I decided I needed a weekend away to clear my head and get back into the grind. I decided to take a 2-night trip, just me and our dogs, to a lake off an old logging road about 3 hours from home. It was one of my favorite spots, and I knew the woods there quite well. I packed my things, leashed the dogs, 2 blue heelers by the way, and set out early one Tuesday morning. When I got to the trailhead, the parking lot was empty. Middle of the week, and I was stoked to be alone. There was a single deer path up a canyon about 1,200 feet over 5 miles to get to the lake, and neither myself nor the dogs met anyone else on the trail the entire way up the mountain. I got to the lake around midday, spent the afternoon fishing and collecting wood and water for the coming night. The lake was pristine and quiet, not a soul in sight. I was truly alone, aside from the dogs. I found a flat spot on the east side of the lake where the vegetation cleared and I could set up a tent, and I made a small camp about 30 yards from the trail. I would have preferred to go further up the mountain, but it was still early in the season, and when I got to my campsite, the rest of the trail was too snow-packed to continue any further. As it was, I had to navigate over several hard-packed embankments before I got to a suitable area. the icy slush was difficult to navigate, even for the dogs, and when we finally crushed our way over and through a few hundred yards, I made the decision we would be going no further. I set up my tent, hung my pack on a limb, and took out my fishing pole, and went back in the direction I had come. I spent the evening catching and cooking fish at the edge of the spillway, and as the sun began to set, the dogs and I made our way back to the tent, slipping over wet stumps and clumsily pushing through the snow. I stumbled into camp exhausted and ready for a fire. As I approached the site, though, I realized some things were out of place. My pack, which had been hung on a limb, was sitting neatly on the other side of the clearing about 20 feet from where I had left it. Sitting on top of it was a rather large eagle feather. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The dogs began a low growl, but as they circled the site, there was no one there. As I approached my tent, a stick had been used to carve an inscription into the dirt outside of the entrance. It was 2 U's, one upside down, connected to the other by a thin line, and then further connected by another line to a larger U shape. I would describe it as a Native American pteroglyph in the shape of a bird or an eagle. Uniform, symmetrical, and above all things, fresh. Someone had been here. Someone neither I nor the 2 very distrusting dogs had seen, heard, or smelled. Someone who had left no footprints through the snow and mud. Someone who had not passed us on the trail or whose car had been parked at the trailhead. My stomach dropped. I felt a presence of being watched, but I couldn't tell from where. I quickly built a huge campfire, and with dread watched as the last of the sunlight sank beyond the ridge. That night was a fever dream. Pulling the dogs into the tent with me, I clung to my knife and flashlight, praying that whatever was watching me would just leave. It didn't. Throughout the night, I was periodically awakened to a variety of sounds, yells, shrieks, and the snapping of branches. When these happened, the dogs would sit up, growl, and bark until I would open up the screen of the tent and shine my light into the forest. At one point, I had just drifted off to sleep when the dog's low growl woke me up. Thinking I might have had the drop on whatever it was, I slowly unzippered the tent and leaned out with my flashlight. Taking a breath, I clicked it on. Standing just 3 feet from me was a doe and her calf. I scanned across her. An entire herd was in the sight. As my dogs lost it, the deer spooked and sprinted back into the forest, a crushing and trampling noise as several dozen deer evacuated the area. As it faded, I heard laughter. The deep laughter of a man turned to crying as it escalated. Then sobbing, and then down to deep growling, much more boisterous than anything my dogs could make, or even a bear could produce. I held the dogs tightly, and sleep eluded me for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun peeked into the valley, I packed up my things and left. I have never been so terrified in my life. Has anyone ever experienced something similar? It's been 2 years now, and I can't make sense of it, and I need answers. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you'd be so kind, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And please leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the stories, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Follow me on social media, links to that are in the description, and if you'd like to take your support of my work a little bit further, find a link to my Patreon page or consider purchasing some merchandise at my storefront on tpublic.com. Links to that are below. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.